Hi, welcome to the final presentation of the Collectors Conference, our first Collectors Conference at allaboutStamps.co.uk. Really hope you've enjoyed it. We've really enjoyed putting it together and working with the Great Britain Philatelic Society, so thanks to everyone involved. The final talk today is from Barry Stagg. Barry's going to talk to us about King Edward VIII stamps. So it's over to you, Barry.
Hello and welcome to this talk on Britain's King Edward VIII stamps, his stamp coils and booklets. I hope you find it interesting. As we all know, George V died on January the 20th, 1936, and Edward became king straight away. Fairly quickly, the post office decided that they wanted to get some stamps out for his reign. And very quickly again, they decided they want to do this in 3 phases. The first phase was the Ascension phase, where they wanted to get these out by July of 1936, so they only had 6 months to do this. Then they get some stamps out for the Coronation, which was going to be in May 1937. Then after that, they would have the normal definitive issues coming after the Coronation. To help speed up the work, the post office decided not to go out to tender, not to ask artists and engravers for their ideas. They went straight to Harrison's, and Harrison's, being the printer of the day, came up with some ideas. The first one here is shown on the right hand side, which they did in April. It was in 4 colours. The post office took this to the king and he didn't like it. The post office asked Harrison's to make some modifications, which largely consisted of changing the tablet from 4 pence to 1.5, and putting 2 more colours on, which I've shown 2 of them here. And again, he didn't like it. You'll notice on the bottom there, I've shown some of the block Cypher, which was the watermark used on the stamp paper. The left-hand one being George V, and because Harrison's didn't have watermark paper for Edward VIII, they used the George V stocks. The Edward VIII one came out for the stamps, or was available for the stamps proper some months later. You'll notice that for the first time, the 8 is actually in Arabic, not in Roman numerals. There was 2 reasons, I believe, for this. One was that EV111R would be a bit long to put across a stamp, and it might not all go in. And secondly, they thought the 111 would actually thin the paper out too much. So they went to Arabic, which I think looks quite nice. Now, as I said, the post office did not go out to tender or to ask people for designs. They wanted to speed things up. But that didn't stop people putting submissions in, and a wide range of people did put suggestions to the post office. 2 of the most famous ones are here. On the left-hand side, this is from the Williams brothers, very famous philatelists of the day. And they came up with some bromides, these 3 bromides, which they put to the post office, who rejected them. Then they put some more in, which I don't show, but those are also rejected. But there's also this one from a Hubert Brown on the right-hand side, which Harrison's did like and got their own people to make a stamp of his basic design, which you see there. And they rather liked this, and the post office liked it. And ultimately, the king saw that design and liked it, and that was the foundation for the stamp. Now, what nobody knew at the time was that Hubert Brown, in fact, was a schoolboy, and he eventually got some credit for doing this, but not a lot, and certainly not much financial reward. So this takes us to the Coronation Essays they started working on in late 1936. And they came up with a whole variety of designs. In fact, the first 5 essays, 3 of which I show at the top here, show the king in the uniform of the Welsh Guards. This time they did go to the Fine Arts Commission because they did get some criticism for not going for the Ascension. issue. So this time they did, and Harrison's and Sons and the Post Office sent this to the Fine Arts Commission, and not surprisingly, they came back with a range of suggestions, and which they made some changes to, and some further designs. And so further essays were produced, another 6 were produced. I've shown 3 of them here. And they sent those to the Commission in September 1936. The Commission took a couple of months to suggest further alterations, but before much could happen, the 10th of December 1936 came along and the King abdicated. Could I just mention 2 things while we're on this page? On the top line, in the middle there, the pink coloured one, in the middle of the top line, you'll notice the motifs of the 4 countries, the rose, the thistle and the shamrock. And in the bottom left-hand corner is the daffodil. I believe this is the first representation of the daffodil on British postage stamps. And had that design been picked, it would have been the first time the daffodil would have been used in a series of British stamps as a symbol of Wales. I would also like to mention the 10th of December 1936 date. You often see the abdication either called the 10th or the 11th. The 10th is actually when he signed the bit of paper in front of his brothers that he was giving up. The 11th of December is when it went through the formalities of government and Parliament. So sometimes you see both. Very early on, the Post Office approached the King with a few suggestions for Edward's Cypher. This was because Royal Mail was carried free by tradition by the Post Office. Edward had particular ideas on things, and he liked things simple and nice and clean. He didn't like any of their suggestions, drew a sketch of what he thought would be a good one. Post Office went away and turned that into something a bit more presentable, and here you see it there, ERIV 111. And he used that throughout his 11-month reign. Interestingly, the hand stamp is actually upside down, but it's actually the 30th of December 36, so this was some weeks after he'd abdicated, but he was still using it. So this is the issue stamps, and immediately you can see the likeness with the brown idea. And I think they're a nice, simple, straightforward stamp. It didn't get universal approval, but it got a lot of good press, and people generally liked them. The public certainly liked them. They were issued on the 1st of September, except the penny, which was on the 14th of September. They were issued in sheets of 240. I'm often asked why was there a 2-week difference between the two, between the 1st of September for 3 stamps and the penny on the 14th. I believe that was simply because the Post Office had lots and lots of George V pennies still left, and they wanted to make sure that they used them all up. If you do the maths, you can see from the bottom, 702 million penny stamps were printed over the 11-month reign. So that's about 60 million penny stamps required every month for British postage. 2 weeks, that's some 30 million stamps they had to use up. And the Post Office was meticulous with its accounting, and it certainly would have wanted to throw those away. You'll see at the bottom there as well, the figures for all those which were sold over the 11 months. And these are huge figures, 1.8 billion penny halfpenny stamps actually sold, a tremendous figure. They covered, of course, the paper rate and the postcard rate. Postcards were still very, very popular in this period. And the basic internal and empire rate for the penny halfpenny and the twopenny halfpenny, the foreign rate. And perhaps it's a sign of the times, but I must admit, empire rate and foreign rate does grate a little bit with me. But there we are, that's what they call it on the day. And it's interesting that you could send a letter, a basic rate letter to Australia for a penny halfpenny, but it cost you 2.5 pence to send it to France, for instance. Very interesting. Okay, these are the issued stamps. I've shown here on the left-hand side the first cylinder used, which was cylinder 4, and on the right-hand side the last cylinder used, cylinder 26. You will notice that there's an A36, the so-called control on one, and A37. These represent the years these were printed, and this is for the accountancy purposes. The 4, you'll notice, has no dot after it, and the 26 in the margin on the right-hand side does. This was because when they printed these on the roller, the left-hand side had no dot, and the right-hand side had the dot, because you had 2 panes side by side. So every revolution of the cylinder was 480 stamps were produced. And as an aside, if you do a very quick bit of maths, you know how many stamps were totally produced or certainly sold. If there was roughly 500 every time the cylinder went round, that was 200,000 revolutions of every cylinder. That's a lot of wear, so I'm not surprised they went through 13 cylinders. Here we have seven cylinders, did 702 million stamps again, from cylinder 2 to cylinder 14. And for their biggest sales, the penny halfpenny, 15 cylinders used, printed a 1.8 billion stamps. That's an amazing figure, an amazing figure. I thought I'd show you a couple of the errors. There are 3 or 4 constant errors which are worth looking out for. And the first one, the pearl in the crown, you can find this on the bottom row on the second column, and hopefully you can see a little dot. This is sharper in some of the earlier printings, and then gradually it wears away to a very fine ring, but you can see it just with the naked eye. And this was from cylinder 7, and also appeared on 10 and 12. So it was what they call a multi-positive. They use the same screen to produce a cylinder for 7 as 10 and 12. It's exactly the same fault. And very collectible, very collectible. The penny halfpenny is the hair coif. This is what they call state 6, where the cylinder has gone through a variety of changes. The slightly earlier state 5, actually shows it a lot more, and it's like a small eruption of the hair. You can just about see this with the naked eye, but it is one of the faults to look out for. And you can see this on the first column on row 18 of cylinder 2. I think you'd like to see these. These are rather nice errors. They're one-off errors. The left-hand one, where there's been a mirror image has been caused by the sleevage being folded over when the printing is still wet, obviously as accident, and I think it looks quite nice. King Edward look at it himself. That's quite a nice piece there. And on the right-hand side, a straight sheet there, or part of a sheet, where the inking is drying out, possibly towards the end of a run, and you see it's very mottled, and there's no thickness to the paint at all. But I rather like that. So taking us to the last stamp in the set of 4, the 2.5 pence. The only 2 cylinders were used, as far as we know, 31 million, so not the biggest numbers. But instead of having an A37, they actually put a little engraved line under the 36. And they did this for, say, for accountancy purposes. But of course, by the time they got into 1937, the king had already abdicated. Making new cylinders was expensive. So they didn't want to engrave a new cylinder just for the final few months of use. So there we are. That's quite a nice one. And there is one constant error, which is visible to the naked eye. This is the dot in the ear, or the spot in the ear, or the speck in the ear. It's all different things. You can you can see it with the naked eye. You'll find it on the last column, on the 13th row. You will see the stamp sheet divider, the halfway line markings just above it. So the one underneath that is 11, 12, 13th one, and it's in the year. It's quite a nice font to find, and under a magnifying glass, it looks very prominent. So I thought I'd show you some usages of the stamps. On the left-hand side there, you have a nice halfpenny stamp with some perf, so suggesting this was a business use. It is dated the 10th of December, I think purely by chance, the date of the abdication, which makes it a little bit more interesting. And this is the sort of thing you would have had invoices in, for instance. On the right-hand side, straightforward postcard. It's actually a packbow postcard sent to London. From a ship which went into Southampton, a British ship which came into Southampton. So some of the internal and foreign mail. On the left-hand one, this envelope intrigued me a little bit, undelivered for reasons stated, and when you look on the back, it says the firm is defunct, which is not an expression I'm aware the post office use today. Yeah, quite a nice marking. Perhaps the postman was terribly annoyed, and that's why he stamped it twice, return to sender. And on the right-hand side, another packbow, and this one being posted from a British ship entering the Panama Canal back in April 1937. The 1930s was a great time for new airmail routes, and I know there are a lot of airmail collectors out there. And I thought I'd put these two in. I rather like these. The left-hand one was a letter down to Dar es Salaam in May 1937. It's a correct postage rate, but it's an interesting. I think it is a proper commercial letter. I can't imagine a stamp collector, for instance, would have put the halfpenny stamp over the airmail label. So I'm rather pleased with that. It's been in the wars a little bit, but it's still quite a nice grouping there. You will notice the left-hand halfpenny has the perforations on the top missing, suggesting to me this was possibly from a stamp booklet, where the perforations can range from nothing to the complete perforation. As you would see on the bottom, the lowest of the halfpennies, where you've got the complete hole. So I suspect these were from a booklet. The right-hand side, this was it's a first flight one down to Lagos in Nigeria. And again, it's got some nice markings and clear markings. I suspect, as it's dated the 16th of October, the first date, this was a philatelic item, if you want to be a purist, but nevertheless, it's a nice envelope with a nice selection of stamps on. Again, the poached egg and the bisect stamps I rather like. They're an interesting use. They're called poached egg because this is the left hand of the three, because it looks like a poached egg. They clearly were used by the technicians who were repairing, testing the dispensing machines, and they needed something. The post office weren't going to give them real stamps, so they came up with this idea of these poached egg stamps. Unfortunately, they used a colour for them which was readily available, i.e. the halfpenny. And I've seen lots and lots of these being used through the mail. I have never, I think it's true to say, seen one with a to pay label on, which of course it's not valid for postage. But the vast majority seem to have gone through. Now, whether it was done by accident or design, who knows? But again, they make an interesting side collection. And on the right-hand side, we have the penny bisect. As far as I'm aware, the post office never sanctioned bisects in this country, but clearly people ran out of stamps, and you do see them, and they're reasonably common to find. And again, I very rarely see one with a to pay label on. The post office were quite happy to take them through the system without any problem. So moving on to stamp rolls. Altogether, there were 10 rolls produced for different purposes. You'll notice that the headers are the same colour, or approximately the same colour as the stamps. It makes it easier for the staff. This one, they come in different sizes, all values except the penny halfpenny. There was never a penny halfpenny roll. So this is the halfpenny one, and you'll notice from the date there, the first roll was on the 18th of December 1936, so a week after the king had abdicated, which is interesting. And the bottom one you'll see there, one with a piece of wax on, which on the roll they had a bit of ribbon round. I have a little bit of it left there, and the wax kept it all in place. And they're quite hard to find with the wax and a bit of the ribbon still on it. So I'm quite pleased with that. And here's two examples of the pennies. As I said, machines were basically into two categories. You could find machines in the post office, on the walls on the post office, where you could help yourself outside the post office. And so at any time, day and night, you could get your stamps. And some of them, these machines, were used by businesses, particularly big businesses, so they didn't have to keep trotting along to the post office to get their penny stamps. At the top one, you'll notice only 4,000 rolls were sold, which 4,000 is a large number, but in stamp world, that's quite small. So I was quite pleased to come across this some time ago. They all were available for all of 1937, and it wasn't until the George VI rolls started to turn up did they take these out of service. So stamp books. I find these a quite fascinating topic. There were 4 stamp books in value. The top left-hand one, this plain buff-coloured one, no advertising. It just contained 2 panes of 2 1.5 pence stamps. And there's the 2 shilling, 3 shilling and 5 shilling booklets, which had adverts on the front cover, the back cover, and in the case of the 2 shilling and 5 shilling inside as well. You could see on the top there are staples, whereas others use stitchings. And it wasn't uncommon for the stitching to come out in manufacture. And again, the post office, being very careful with money, didn't want to lose the value of the stamps. So they used reprinted front covers and stapled them, literally stapled them through. And again, there's quite a few of those around, and they make a nice, interesting collection. In terms of the blue ones, there were 32 different types of blue designs. So where it says Bovril for fitness, they often had other things in there. The 5 shilling, they only had 2, and the 3 shilling, they had 13 different advertisements on the front cover. But the 3 shilling had nothing inside in terms of advertising, just the sheet, and just the stamps themselves. And here are some selections of the stamps themselves. On the bottom right-hand corner, you see the small stamp booklet one with just 2 panes like that. We'll put inside that little teeny buff-coloured booklet, and that was dispensed from machines, the number of machines. I showed the 3 values there. The 2.5 pence was never used inside the booklet. The penny, penny halfpenny, and halfpenny were, and they all come with 3 different styles of perforation. And if you look at the arrow in the bottom left-hand corner, or the one I've labelled A, you'll notice there's no continuation hole of the horizontal perforation. It just butts up nicely to the vertical perforation. If you look at B, on the other hand, in the top right-hand corner, you will notice 1 extension hole horizontally in the middle there. And on the top left, C, you'll see the perforation going all the way across. And you find these on the penny, penny halfpenny, and halfpenny. And again, they're a nice thing to collect. There's lots of variety in there. You also notice on the halfpenny, on the bottom left of that, there's an E2 dot, and that's the cylinder number. There were different cylinders, about 2, sometimes 4 cylinders used to print these. And again, it's nice to find all these cylinders. Some of them are incredibly difficult to find. And the stamp advertising panes. There were 16 different types of advertising panes. I don't have time to run through them all, but here are just a sample of 4 of them. For those of you who are under the age of 50, you perhaps don't realise that the post office was responsible both for the telephone and the mail back in the day. So there was lots of advertisements for please come on a telephone and speak to us over the phone. Airmail, as I mentioned earlier on, was the incoming thing, so they were telling you to use the airmail service. People wanted to save money in those days, so saving money was one, and there's certainly some commercial banks who advertised as well. And these you can find inside those booklets, and there's a lot of study on which adverts go with which booklets, and there's a number of little varieties, which again makes it fun to look after. I thought you'd like to know roughly what else people advertised with. There was certainly a card game being advertised, wardrobe fittings, stamp collecting. In fact, there's a nice stamp collecting one. Please be a stamp collector. And one for furniture. And the one I particularly like is lingerie ribbons, which does stir the imagination perhaps, but they were advertised in there as well. I hope I've interested you in the stamps of Edward VIII. There's many, many, many more there, but I just don't have time to show you them all. I've given you a few references there. The most famous one perhaps is Kirk, which is reference number 4 there. That little booklet can be found fairly easily on one of the online auction sites for quite a reasonable price. You could also get a copy of the King Edward VIII to King George VI Specialist Stamp Catalogue, which perhaps is not so reasonably priced. And there are lots and lots of articles in most of the stamp magazines going back some years, and you can find lots of those. And last one I would mention is the Great Britain Philatelic Society's website has a huge collection of journals, and you can search those and find lots of Edward VIII. I picked out one because I mentioned the curious Quaff and Robin's paper, and other papers on Edward VIII are always worth a read. If you're interested in the essays, then the Postal Museum used to have, they don't anymore sadly, I had 4 postcards which show all the different stamps, and many I haven't had time to show you. And again, now available on various auction sites. So thank you for listening. Thank you for staying this long with me. I hope you found it stimulating, and thank you and goodbye.
Barry, thanks so much for that. Really interesting. I loved some of the items you've got there, the stamp booklets, the advertising panels on them. Really interesting. I love those. One of the things that struck me, you might want to kind of expand upon, is just King Edward VIII stamps. You kind of look at them in the catalogues, just going back in history, and you think, okay, there's a couple of stamps there. I can easily complete that collection pretty quickly. But it's not quite so simple from what you've shown us, is it?
No, well, that's how I started. In fact, I'm usually a thematic collector, and many years ago now, 20, 30 years ago, I wanted something which was bounded.
Yeah.
So I thought, hey, 4 stamps, there's a few varieties, a couple of booklets, hey, that's going to be easy, But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a tremendous amount, and there are some people who collect nothing but the booklets, which could be a lifetime study. There's an awful lot there. Other people like going through the sheet stamps, looking for minute flaws which you can't see without a magnifying glass. Each to their own. I think it really does throw open a whole range of things, and it is reasonably well defined. And the stamps are reasonably cheap compared to many.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. If someone wanted to start an Edward VIII collection, is it difficult to find the material? And is there anything that's really very expensive?
The individual stamps, you can buy them for next to nothing. If you go onto a well-known auction site, there are thousands. The quality is not always good, and people do think they're worth a lot more than they are. But certainly, getting nice blocks of 4 or 6 of any of the values from any cylinder would be within the range of any schoolboy's pocket money. Some of the cylinders are rarer than others, but the vast majority would be in the £5–10 range. There are some which are a lot more. What I didn't mention was the different perforations, because that takes a lot more explaining. And some of the perforations tend to get into the hundreds of pounds. The coils are reasonably easy to find, the vast majority, except 2 coils, which even I can't find. I've seen one of them in an auction many, many years ago, but I've never seen any more for sale. And these were for the higher values, which just so few of them, I suspect the vast majority were destroyed.
Yeah.
And the booklet panes, again, if you don't want one with the cylinder number on, which can be a bit more expensive, most of those 16 panes can be found quite easily. The trick is, do you want really good perforations or not? Because the way they were produced, they often were cut short, and so it was a terribly, it didn't look particularly pleasing to the eye, but they were still valid and everything. They just weren't cut very well. But those can be done reasonably cheaply, 1 or 2 exceptions. The expensive, by most people's definition, were the essays. But fortunately, most of the essays some time ago, and the prices have gone up since then. But so few of them are available on the market, and they're often put out on silly prices, so I ignore them. But they are available.
Yeah, okay. So there's something for everyone, really, isn't there?
I think so, yeah. Yes, I think so, yes.
Okay. What have you got a particular item that's a favourite of yours, if you had to pick one?
Yes, the essay with the daffodil. One of my other hats, I love daffodils, and I have a daffodil collection. And in fact, that's how I came across this particular one. I didn't come it through looking for Edward VIII. I was looking for daffodils. And I think that's quite an exciting find. It obviously didn't go anywhere, but nevertheless, being the first possibility, serious possibility, I think was a nice one. I rather like it. It's a nice colour as well. Not too complicated stamp. I rather like it.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, thanks so much for your time, Barry. That's been really, really, really interesting, and I'm sure it's kind of inspired people to have another look at something that they maybe think is, as you say, just a couple of stamps. So that's fantastic. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure, Matt. My pleasure.